Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Kansas City Women in Science, Entrepreneurship, and Research event. We're so happy that you joined us. I'm Dena Ladd, the Executive Director of the Missouri Cures Education Foundation. Our mission is to protect and promote all medical research around the state. So we have the absolute pleasure of working with patient advocates, researchers, physicians, innovation centers, and we're thrilled to be with you today. 7 years ago, Missouri Cures started WISER Women, the Women in Science, Entrepreneurship, and Research events. The first time we had the conference, we had about 300 women attend here in St. Louis. And since then, we are all around the state, and we're absolutely thrilled to connect women who work in science, entrepreneurship, and research. As you know, we're going virtual this year. All of our WISER events are virtual. And the exciting thing about that is you can attend our upcoming Columbia and St. Louis event this fall. And I'm hoping that some of you on this Zoom are from St. Louis, Columbia, and we have got an exciting panel of women from Kansas City for you today. We've also found some other ways to connect everyone. We just started our WISER Conversations Facebook group page. So please join, leave your comments, put some articles on there that might be of interest to women, WISER women. And we just started our WISER Conversations podcast, so I hope you enjoy that. We could not do these events around the state without our amazing partners. And today we're partnering with Biokansas and BioNexus, two partners that have worked with us over the years and helped bring WISER to Kansas City. So right now I'd like to turn it over to the president of Biokansas, Sonia Hall.
Great, thank you, Dena. It's great to be here today, and welcome everyone. We're really excited to have you here with us for this wonderful conversation. I'd like to introduce to you 4 women who've really stood out in my professional experience. Some of them I've worked closely with, some of them I've admired from afar. The first one of these tremendous women is Prachee Avasthi. She's an assistant professor of anatomy and cell biology at the University of Kansas Medical Center. Our second panelist is Sue Rahman. She's an endowed professor and director of healthcare innovation at Children's Mercy in Kansas City. We also have Andrea Sellers, who is a partner at Stinson LLP, which is a law firm here in Kansas City, Missouri. And then we have Amber Yount, pharmaceutical department manager at Burns & McDonnell, one of the largest engineering firms in the area. So I'd like to start our conversation on the topic of mentorship. I think it's a critical core part of how many of us are able to successfully navigate our professional careers and transitions. And mentorship is incredibly important to our personal and professional growth, but it's really not always easy to know what kind of qualities to look for in a mentor. Sue, I'd like to ask you, what did you find most valuable about the way your mentors interacted with you?
Sure, Sonia. So for me, the best mentors that I have were like supportive parents. They were the ones who didn't impose any limits on what I was permitted to do. They always provided encouragement and guidance, and they gave me the freedom to pursue what I chose. They also advocated for my ability to do so when was necessary in the course of the organization. And this has really kind of shaped a couple of things for me. It shapes the way I interact with my trainees, with whom I discuss strategy, but I encourage them to make their own decisions. They know that we're going to do a postmortem after the fact to examine those choices, but they've got the support to do what it is they want to do. And it's also shaped my advice for trainees as they transition into their next position, which is to look beyond the shine of the position or the organization and really think about prioritizing interpersonal relationships for the person that you're going to report to. Do you believe they will mentor and advocate for you?
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And Prachee, you've had mentors that you hadn't even met. Can you explain how someone can be a mentor by example and how to maximize that type of relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. So Yeah, I think we are all sort of the, a whole of many pieces of mentorship that we pick up along our entire lives, right? So even though much of our focus on mentorship is from the, individual, mentors we choose through our training, and there may be one or two people who stand out there, maybe an advisor in school and things like that. But I feel like some of the biggest influences in my life have been people that I've watched from afar. So whether it could be anywhere from social media or even from interactions at professional conferences, anything that you can, any place where you might come in contact with someone who you admire. And so, and that can happen even from a distance. And I will say that I think some of the most influential people in my life have been people that I had not met at the time. And so I think just observing how, they do their work, how they do their science. So this can be, both in how they run their professional life, but also in their science. So I would say even from, reading scientific manuscripts, I feel like I've been mentored in my science by reading beautiful work, so I think that all of these things are things we pick up. And one power that all of us have is to pick and choose, the things that we like about different mentors and put that together in our own strategy. So I think that those habits can be picked up from anywhere. And that's something to keep in mind when we are mentoring others, is also that they are observing us, right? So that people are observing how we act, not just what we say. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind and reflect what it is that you want people to see.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that idea of multiple mentors is often something that is frequently overlooked and critically important. And, as we progress through our career, one of the reasons that those multiple mentors are so important is that our mentorship needs really change. Andrea, how have your interactions with your mentors changed from when you were early in your career to now?
Right. Yeah. It's the needs have changed, the mentors have changed, and the relationships with specific mentors have changed. Early in my career, it was primarily the traditional mentorship role, someone helping me navigate the waters of my profession, the politics of the workplace, how to do work-life balance. But as my career has progressed, some of those early mentors have now become, we're mentoring each other. There's more of a two-way dialogue where we bounce ideas off of each other. And along the way, I've had people who come in and come out in different mentorship roles as my career has changed. But one of the things that I found really valuable is keeping in touch with some of those mentors from early in my career, even if the original intent or the original purpose of that mentorship is no longer there. Having someone who's seen me throughout my entire career, knows, what I've been through, someone who knows the good and the bad, it's really valuable to have that resource to bounce things off of, because they have the depth of knowledge and into my personality and everything else that helps it be a real valuable relationship because of the history that we have.
Yeah, they can really provide that depth, right, in that long-term perspective of where you've been and where you are now and kind of how you navigate difficult situations, which is difficult for somebody who's just gotten to know you in the last year or so, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of us really understand, certain aspects of mentorship at least, but not as many people are familiar with this idea of sponsors and the roles of sponsors. Amber, how do sponsors contribute to career success in an industry like yours?
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. So Sue mentioned advocacy, and I find that that's one of the key components in really a successful career. It's important that the people that you choose as your mentors have a pipeline to some of the decision makers and have that ability to advocate for you. In many industries, perception is reality. And so if there is not somebody there that is being vocally supportive of you to your upper management and your upper leadership, no matter how good of work you do, that might be overlooked. So really important to find that advocate and make sure that they're talking about you and your good work that you're doing.
That's fantastic. So for those of you that are in the audience, if you have any questions around the topic of mentorship or sponsors, we encourage you to add your question to the chat. And at the end of the panel, as time remains, the panelists will be answering those questions from you. You can feel free to address them to a specific panelist, or you can just leave your question in general. I think that, you know, all of your comments give us a good overview of mentorship and start to touch on this idea of sponsors. But I'd like to move on to a second topic. You know, personal branding is this process of marketing your strengths, your assets, and value. And this issue seems to be especially topical for women as we try to self-define our professional selves in this world of traditional gender expectations and implicit bias. Now, Prachee, you and I actually first met through Twitter, and you've created these robust networks and initiatives that you've kind of fostered and facilitated through that social media. What's been the benefit of using social media to market your skills and talents, and how has this actually impacted your career progression?
Yeah, so I can't say enough about this, and I think about branding a little bit, I think differently. You know, I think when I talk to other people, I often hear them say things like, you know, this is, you know, I can't believe I've got to do my job, but I also have to do this, you know, advertising job, and who has time for that? And it seems like a distraction and things. And I don't think about it that way at all. My personal opinion is that, you know, I think of it more from this, you know, this empathetic viewpoint. You know, if you think about how much, you know, we all have to do and how much time we all have to do it, you know, it's impossible to think that we are going to naturally stumble upon everybody and what they're doing. You know, when you think about science, it's like you can't read all of the work that's out there. You're not going to notice every person that's out there. You know, it's like there's a fire hose of information coming at you, and we only have this limited amount of time. And so it's not really reasonable to assume that people will just stumble upon your greatness. You know, I feel that there's sort of this assumption that, oh, if I just put my head down and do good work, I will be discovered. and that, I think, is not really realistic. So it's not so much that, yes, you know, those things are extra to put yourself out there and make sure that that people are aware of what you're doing. But I sort of think of it that way, that you sort of have to shake people by the shoulders and make them look, so that they, you know, in the sea of all of the work and all of the, you know, talent that's out there, that you are able to demonstrate what you're doing. So in keeping with that theme, you know, I think that it's really important to just, you know, make sure that people are aware of your efforts, and especially so that they can also benefit from what you've learned. And that's where many of the different initiatives that I've been involved in come from, where I sort of have learned something and I'm trying to share it with others, or I personally need something, and so I've created it so that others can benefit from it too. And so I would say that has immeasurably helped my career. I think that it turns out that when you think something is important, or you find something helps you and you share that, it helps, you know, you're not the only one, you know, that feels that way. And so that's how those things have had a broader impact on people that I've come across. So I think that it's extremely important and necessary, and a reality too, that we have to make sure that we share what it is that we're doing. And I think Twitter is a great way to do that. And one of the reasons that I've met you and so many others, that's been, you know, outstanding for my career, and also really enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah, and it definitely does leave this very visible mark, right? And I know that one of the things that always resonated for me is watching women in science that did this really well, whether they were in their career along the same timing as me, or ahead of me, or following, you know, slowly or shortly behind. There was just this way that we were able to connect at a community-based level, right? And for me, that was very meaningful, because not only did I associate the importance of your work as a scientist and those scientific contributions, but also those social contributions that you made. And I think those two things together are very powerful. Absolutely. It's a unique strategy. Amber, what kind of strategies do you use to set yourself apart in your industry?
Yeah, thank you. So for me, it was very important to do something that I was passionate about. You know, passion speaks to people. If you are very, if you're very into the things that you're doing, that resonates with folks. So for me, I was very passionate about the life sciences industry. So that's what I pursued, but in an engineering standpoint. And it's important to hone your craft. Don't just take the information that other people have developed and regurgitate it. Really become an expert in your field, ask questions, challenge some of the norms, and then you become somebody that other people are wanting to learn from.
That's fantastic. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about science, engineering, mathematics, right? A lot of these, even entrepreneurial groups, is that there's no shame in asking the questions. In fact, you often benefit most when you're the individual who asks the majority of the questions in a group. So that's great advice. Andrea, how do you leverage your network in moving your personal brand forward?
Right, and networks are those things that, we know we have to have, and to Prachee's point, one of the things that people don't like networking, or it gets a bad name, but my network, I've learned to really appreciate what it can do for me, and really appreciate the relationships that I build there. And so it's not artificial, it's in the areas that I'm passionate about. I've made deeper, more meaningful relationships with people in that area. And so that then has allowed them to carry my brand forward. They know me, they know what I'm good at, they know my strengths and weaknesses. And so through these authentic, meaningful relationships, my brand is naturally carried forward by people who know me.
That's great. Yeah. And then there's another level of sincerity to it, right? It's just holistically who you are, which is fantastic. Yeah. And so again, for anybody who's just recently joined in on our conversation today, we've just been talking about personal branding. If you have any questions related to personal branding, I just encourage you to add those to the chat, and the panelists will be answering those questions at the end of our discussion. So let's move on to negotiation. The art of negotiation comes into play often in our daily lives, but it becomes especially important when we're thinking about career advancement. So Sue, what advice do you give to your mentees on negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, the first piece of advice is self-evident, right? But you're not going to get what you don't ask for. Now, that being said, you need to be asking for things that are thoughtful and justified. So you have to have a rationale for why you're asking for them. You also really need to understand the landscape, the marketplace. Do your own reconnaissance work to get a sense of what's reasonable and what's not, and critically evaluate your skills and training. So I train subspecialists. And when they're transitioning to new positions, they invariably target salaries at the 50th percentile. And I've got to have a conversation with every one of them asking whether they believe they operate at the 50th percentile. And realistically, they don't believe that. So the question always becomes, why is that what you're asking for? I also recommend, as you're negotiating the position, that you set a range for your expectation of various elements of the job. Decide when you're willing to step outside of that range and when you're willing to walk away, which is probably the scariest thing that you can do, is walk away from a job offer without having another one. So for example, if I'm looking for a research position in academic medicine, accepting a position that has 50% clinical time, which is never 50%, which we all know, won't give me enough time to be successful as a researcher. And that's the type of position I might walk away from. If I'm interested in starting a family, a job requiring 70% travel may not be ideal for that position. The other piece of advice I give my trainees is, in addition to the ask, provide your prospective employer with the return on investment. So let them know what you're going to deliver to them as a result of that investment, and what time frame you think you're going to be able to accomplish that in. Because at the end of the day, your success is going to be their success.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Andrea, how do you utilize a backup plan in helping you prepare for a negotiation?
Right, to Sue's point about being willing to walk away and doing your research, I always have in the back of my mind, if this doesn't work out, this is the alternative. What is my best alternative to negotiating this position? And that really helps then feeling comfortable walking away, or knowing that that range that Sue talked about maybe needs to be a little bit broader because the other options may not be out there. So doing that homework up front and knowing that there are things out there and you have other alternatives if this negotiation doesn't work out. really gives you power and comfort in doing the negotiations.
Great, thank you. Prachee, even though we often logically know the importance of negotiating, it's still incredibly difficult for a lot of women to advocate for themselves. Do you have any advice on how to mentally reframe a negotiation? Because the advice that Sue provided is fantastic, but it still kind of takes this amount of courage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the thing I think about with negotiation is that to keep in mind that this is a two-way street, right? So if you are in a position to negotiate a position, that's very likely because some other party has decided that they would like to hire you, that they have found some value in you joining their institution or their company. So, keeping that in mind, you have a lot of assets to bring to the table, and as Sue said, your success is their success. So, everybody in this negotiation wants you to succeed. They want you as part of their institution so that you can succeed. So when you think about that, when you're thinking about the negotiation, I always think about, okay, well, what is it that I need to succeed, right? And so, if I want this opportunity because I want to succeed. They want me because they want me to succeed. So what needs to happen, right? So a lot of those negotiation points may be around things that will help you succeed. And then, so that is one way to think about it, where you think, okay, well, this is something that is of mutual benefit, not just my benefit versus their benefit, but this is something that we are trying to get for mutual benefit. And then the other thing is that often when you're negotiating something, you're negotiating with an entity, you're negotiating with a specific person, but those resources that they have at their disposal are not necessarily completely up to them. They may be, moving, along the chain to try and obtain resources in order to get you what you need for that negotiation. So what you want to do is make sure that you, make, like Sue said, make the, a full justification of these things that you need to succeed, but also, work with that person. They are your advocate to try and get the resources that you need, right? So when you think about it as being on the same team, both trying to get something for mutual benefit and both working together to try and obtain the resources that you need to succeed, now you are on the same team, and this is someone you can work with, and you can sort of reframe it that way. So when it's not so adversarial, that can sort of give you a little bit more, strength and fearlessness, because they're not really working against each other.
Yeah, that's great. I like that idea of reframing the conversation. I think that's an important thing to move forward, especially as we try to get more and more women into leadership roles, right? And we know that there are fewer women as we progress up that career ladder. And while there are a lot of unseen barriers that contribute, maybe like having difficulties negotiating, right? I think a major one is actually implicit bias, which, basically is between the way women are seen and the narrow definitions of what leadership looks like, that makes this even more complex. Amber, how can women create competitive advantage in a way that's authentic to them?
Yeah, my best advice here is to you do you. So what makes you unique? I've grown my professional career in a male-dominated field, and frankly, I think a little bit differently than my male counterparts. And I think that a lot of women, or anyone with a diverse background, does think a little bit differently. Use that to your advantage. Don't be afraid to give your different perspective on that. Because what may seem like common sense to me may be a very unique idea to them. So utilize that to your advantage.
Great, fantastic. And Andrea, what advice do you have for women who are just starting out in a leadership role?
Yeah, following up with what Amber said is, be yourself and allow others to be who they are. We as leadership roles are often defined in a certain way based on the leadership that's been that's gone before, and often it's not defined in a way that allows women to have their strengths really be expressed and materialize. And so really creating an environment where people are allowed to lead and work in the way that allows their strengths to shine, rather than saying that if you're going to be a leader, you have to act this way. And so pushing back on those false parameters as to what it means to be a leader will, I think, help women let their natural talents and unique perspective shine.
Great. And that's a key thing that you've touched on there, right? Is that there's this need for cultural change and widespread policy change as well in order to close that leadership gap. So how might we as individuals contribute when we have the opportunity to sit on, say, a hiring committee, or if we're asked for input on others' promotions?
Yeah, that is a great question. That's a challenge when you're working with larger groups and decision makers that may fall outside of your direct circle of influence. But I would say to look beyond the traditional objective metrics of success that we generally tend to look at. Look at the softer skills that people possess, or more importantly, the balance of perspective that they're going to offer the group with which they're working. We need to actively pursue this type of balance. So it does require, I can't remember, one of our panelists had used the word before, holistic, and it really does require a more holistic approach to evaluating candidates for any opportunity that we have the position to weigh in on.
That's great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of strength that's provided to organizations and departments and even small working groups when we think more about the power of those intersectional qualities and life experiences that people bring to the table. So I completely agree. And I think taking advantage of the right opportunities that come our way, right, or that we create for ourselves, is also really important for working our way up into these various leadership roles. Prachee, as an early career scientist, you've really had the opportunity to participate and lead a lot of exciting projects and initiatives. What are some of the actions that you took that led to those opportunities?
Yeah, so I would say, often the reason why have so many great opportunities is because, one thing that we can all do is decide to, when you see sort of a gap in something that you're doing, almost every opportunity that came up is because I was involved in something, or I was working on something and I saw a need. And often when you see a need, there's always an option for you to be the one to fill it, right? So when you find out that some opportunity doesn't exist, some network doesn't exist, something, that there's any sort of gap in what you're doing. So one example is when I first started my lab, I didn't have a network of other junior people. So this is something that, as you go on in your training, you always have a cohort of students or a cohort of postdocs or a cohort of whoever you're with. And then when you sort of get into your independent position, you don't really have a cohort anymore. And so I saw that this was sort of missing, even though many of us were going through the same thing at the same time. And so that sort of network didn't exist. So I created one, right? So that's one of the things that that we always have the option to do, is when you don't have something that you have access to, you can always be the one to make it happen. And you can always sort of live in the type of future that you want to see happen. And so I think that is something that, lends itself to further opportunity. And we can always, decide to take it upon ourselves to make things happen. And so I think that those are things that we should always keep in mind, is that we don't always have to sort of follow the existing path, that we can sort of make a path for ourselves. And so I think those things, it's important to keep in mind that many of those opportunities could be, you don't know what the benefits are. And I think sometimes people always tell you, it's good to focus on something tangible, make sure you know what the outcomes are. Don't say yes to too many things. There's no shortage of people that will tell you to say no to everything. And I often think that really some of those opportunities, all the opportunities that I have gotten have been from saying yes, from saying yes to things that I didn't really know all of the benefits of. And so, I knew that this is something that's good for me, that maybe is fun, that maybe will get me to know more people, will broaden my network. They may have some sort of intangible benefits, but I don't know really what it's going to look like in the long term. So I think taking that leap of faith when you don't know what's in the long term, many of those things will lead to really outstanding opportunities. And so I think it's the saying yes that really leads to more.
Yeah, so I'd like to extend on that idea of saying yes. I couldn't agree with you more that it creates great opportunities. And it's kind of a way of speaking up, right? And that speaking up within the workplace is really important for shaping policy, changing perspective, and also shifting that culture that we talked about before. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how each of you kind of create or maximize opportunities to be heard. So Prachee, in the context of your career, you really sit on several boards and you're often the youngest person in the room and sometimes even the only person of color, probably more often than not, right? How do you get past that intimidation that a lot of us feel in those types of situations and actually speak up beyond just saying yes?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I will say that the first thing that I learned by doing this was that it gets easier to do it as you practice more, right? And I believe strongly that you can practice and get better at anything, right? That's just what most of us are doing in our careers every single day, right? And so, I think there are many different, tables and positions of leadership in which things look a lot more homogeneous. If I am, as a young person or as a person of color, included among these, I'm there because they want to hear my opinion, because I am different from everyone else and they want that perspective. So I always try to remember I'm there for a reason, right? And so it would be such a shame to be there for a reason, to be different from everyone else because they want my perspective and then not speak up. I can't, to me, that feels like so much more of a travesty to I'm there for a reason, and it's important to make sure I bring that perspective so that I can, fulfill that role that isn't present everywhere else. Not all boards and positions of leadership are heterogeneous like that. So one thing is to sort of remember that I'm there for a reason, and then that helps me, feel that personal responsibility to speak up. And then, it always helps to try and engage further, right? So one thing that helps in helping other people speak up and helping me speak up is when people amplify each other. And I often, and many of these on these boards and things like that, people are outstanding at this, right? So they will recognize and say, oh, well, I, point out what someone said by name and say, I agree with that person. This is what I think. And so that way, instead of people sort of co-opting others' ideas, they're lifting each other up. And I do think that if you do that more, that, it will come back to you. So if you amplify others, others will amplify you. And so keeping that sort of positivity within the group, that also helps you speak up when in sort of intimidating situations.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So let's look at the other side of that. Sue, many times we actually are just in disagreement, or we want to take a stand in a meeting, but we hesitate at the last minute, especially when the political stakes are high. What factors do you consider when you're deciding whether or not to actually say something in those types of situations?
Yeah, so there are two key factors. The first, as Prachee pointed out, is to recognize that my voice is important. So that is the critical piece. And the other critical piece is to set aside your ego and your fear of judgment. People may not agree with you. People may challenge you. Frankly, embrace it. Active dialogue is how we learn to refine our communication skills, how we challenge others and ourselves to think differently, and how we refine or reaffirm the positions that we hold. So it's kind of one of those, get over yourself and just get out there and do it.
Great. So for those of us who are eager to make the workplace more equitable, supporting other women is this action that we take that can truly make a difference. In fact, there's research from the Harvard Business Review that's found that women who also have an inner circle of close female contacts are more likely to land these executive positions with greater authority and also higher pay. So Amber, in your male-dominated industry, does supporting other women become even more critical?
Yeah, I think it does. So Prachee talked a lot about, when you're invited to the meeting, you're there for a reason, and you have the obligation to speak up. And I'm not somebody that's naturally hesitant to give my opinion. And so a lot of times in my career, I forget that there are others in the room that may not may not come from that same kind of place, and they may be hesitating to speak up or advocate for themselves. And several years ago, I was at a conference, and the question was asked, are you doing what you need to do to support other women? And when I thought about that, frankly, the answer was no. I wasn't doing what I needed to support other women. And, so now I try to make a pointed effort, not just supporting women, but especially supporting women in that role. And when I feel comfortable speaking up, calling on them to get their opinion and try to pull it out of them if they're not giving it willingly, just because maybe they're not comfortable speaking in that role.
Yeah, have any of you other panelists have had similar experiences? Because I think that's a challenge, to be able to do that in a way that's supportive, right?
I think, to that point, I think one of the things is just being conscious of it. And so being conscious, I know I'm always worried about what I'm going to say or how I'm going to talk about it, but then being conscious, like Amber said, of who else is at the table, and, giving them, opening up the door for them to speak or to talk. It is easy because then I'm not having to talk, and it's giving someone else the opportunity. But it's that first part of being conscious of the fact that it's something that needs to be done, and the opportunity is there.
Yeah, that's great. I know that for me, that was one of the things that made a huge impact in, kind of boosting my self-confidence in those types of settings, was just being in an environment where there were other women that kind of created that open space for me to kind of step forward and share my opinions, or that would actively ask for my opinion, kind of like you were saying, Amber. And so I really valued that. So I appreciate that you actively look for opportunities to do that. So thank you. So as I mentioned before, I see that a few additional people have entered into the session today. If you have questions for the panelists, we encourage you to ask those. You can direct them either to a specific panelist or just in general through the chat box. And we'll be answering those at the end of the session here. So let's move on to another topic. We know that networks are really critical to career success. And many people still find it challenging to go into those situations where they're networking with other individuals. So Sue, what advice do you have for introverts who are trying to build their network?
I love that Sonia recognizes I'm the introvert of the group, or one of the stronger introverts of the group. This is a tough one, because for introverts, networking can be painful and it can be exhausting. It really can. And unfortunately, this is one of those areas where you have to push through your discomfort. It doesn't mean you need to navigate it alone. As you're learning the skills, our other panelists have said we're constantly learning, but as you're learning these skills, you can ask colleagues to make introductions for you. You can find a trusted colleague who will work a room with you. When you're in a wallflower moment, you can step back and just watch how to read a room and study the dynamics of interaction, and then maybe emulate those behaviors that resonate with you the most. But for me, the most important thing to do at the end of one of those exhausting days was to not chastise myself, because I'm not as outgoing as my colleagues. And I used to do it, but it just is not productive. Rather, I chose to celebrate my small wins when I was able to push past my comfort zone. And those victories are usually celebrated by chocolate and an adult beverage. But whatever it is that you enjoy, I think just recognize that that small win is something to be celebrated, and continue to work on slowly pushing past your discomfort.
Yeah, so building in a little bit of positive reinforcement as well, right? Experiential learning on top of it. It's great. And Prachee, what advice do you have for someone who just thinks that networking's not for them?
Yeah, so this is something I think we're all really, really good at, is sort of saying, well, this is my strengths and this is my weaknesses, and I'm not going to overcome this part of my personality, sort of thing. And I think the thing I try to convey to people who sort of wonder how can I get better at this, is that everywhere in our jobs, we do things that we're not comfortable with, that if nothing comes naturally, most of these things are learned, most of these things are practiced. We in everywhere in our professional lives, we do things that are outside our comfort zone to get better at them, right? And this is just not the exception. I think that sometimes we give ourselves a free pass and say, I'm not like this, so, that person's just good at it. I'm not good at it. This is just not my thing. I don't have to do it, or I don't have to, it's very uncomfortable for me. But so is everything we do in our professional lives, right? And so I think that if we sort of look at it in the same way that we look at the rest of our work and say, I can get better at this. And sometimes I think, the thing I tell, my own trainees sometimes is, they sort of assume like, oh, you're so outgoing, this is so easy for you. And then I'm like, you have no idea how much effort I put into it. And I tell them, like, if you want me to tell you some really embarrassing stories of how, how I really failed at this networking thing, or some really awkward situation I put myself in by being very bad at this, I can tell you dozens of them, but there are only dozens of them because I've tried to do it dozens of times, And so I think, sort of highlighting, and I think that almost always sort of stops them in their tracks, because they make these assumptions that, the people who are good at this, they're just naturally this way. And I think that they don't see how much effort always goes into it. So I think that's something that we can all take with us, is that, we can put in the same sort of effort towards this type of thing, towards networking, as we do other aspects of our work, and then not make assumptions about what's easy or hard, and not give ourselves that free pass.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think, even when we invest a lot of time in building up our network, a place that a lot of us will stumble is then not using that network effectively, because we're really worried that we're going to impose on them. Right. So, Andrea, what advice do you have for someone who's considering asking someone in their network for help or a favor or guidance or advice?
Right. Yeah, it sometimes is daunting to think, well, I don't want to bother someone or impose on them, like you said, but really people want to help other people. And when you are going to someone and asking them for help or a favor, that means that they have something that you value. And so when you're reaching out to someone, you're actually, expressing that they have something of value to you. And in my experience, people really do like to help other people. It makes them, feel valuable. And so I think this whole idea of I'm imposing on someone is really wrong. You're giving someone the opportunity to show their value and to help you going forward.
Great, thanks. So there's one last area that we wanted to cover today, and that's the toll that COVID has been taking on both our personal and our professional lives. So Andrea, I think one area where people struggle is that they're imposing the same metrics of success and expectations on themselves, even though this environment has dramatically changed. How are you coping with that particular disconnect?
One of the things I'm trying to just reframe it in my mind as, excuse me, I'm not failing because I can't keep up with everything. It is a situation that is really, impossible to navigate in the way that, we would have before this happened. So things aren't going to be perfect. You need to give yourself some grace to acknowledge that. And, being a perfectionist, that's really hard to do, but turning the tables around and saying, it's not me that's failing, it's a situation that we've been put in that we're having to deal with, and, working hard and doing what we can, even though it's not perfect, it is enough just to make it through.
And Amber, with home and work life blurred the way it is, some things have to give. How is the way you've managed to change your priorities, or how are you working differently?
Yeah, I would say the situation that we're in, as Andrea said, it's hopefully not permanent. This is temporary. And so we need to really try to let go of the little things. And frankly, it's almost all little things when you really get down to it. So I've really focused on letting go of the things that long-term don't matter. There's a lot of things that are important to me as a mom that I want to instill in my kids, but I've just had to let those go over the last several months. There's been a lot of TV watching. There's been a lot of junk food eating. In the grand scheme of things, these few months are not gonna. They're not going to matter. The kids will be fine. Everybody's going to be fine. We'll move on from this and get our act together again.
Great, that's wonderful. And then I want to put out one last question to each of you, for all of you to answer. I think it's important that we're always very open about what our goals are as professionals, so that we can surround ourselves by community that can elevate us and help us reach those goals. So here, while we have a very large audience of people, can you each share with us, a major goal that you have for yourself? Maybe it's a career step that you'd like to take within the next 5 years, or a skill that you'd like to develop. And I'll put the pressure on Amber first, because now you've had less time to think about this.
Gosh, ultimately, I think that my major goal is to be passionate and happy in what I'm doing. And I don't think that I've never been somebody that wanted to attain a specific role or a specific salary level necessarily. I want to be engaged. I want to be challenged by what I'm doing. I want to be able to have the work-life balance that's important to me. And a lot of those things, passion and challenge, those are the things that do elevate you to new roles and new salary levels. But that was never the goal. That's just kind of a byproduct of doing things that make me happy and that I'm passionate about.
I love that. I can definitely relate to that completely. Now I know why we've crossed paths.
So I can go ahead and answer. Amber gave me a little bit of time to think. I guess it's a little bit embarrassing, because I think that, sometimes when you make lofty goals, you have to admit that you could fail, and so, and that failure is sometimes some things that stop us from being bold and saying the things that we want. But since we're here and the purpose of this is to be bold, I think I got in, one of the driving forces for me in science, besides just a love for science, which I feel every day, is that, I think all of us, coming up, we always find that, there are things that we don't like, things that we would like to see change. And I remember as a student thinking that, certain things were unacceptable. And if I wanted to change them, then I would have to get in there and do it myself. And so I still feel that all the time, that I think that there is, things that we can do in our positions of power and from the inside that we have always wanted to see change. And so that is something that drives me every day, is to think about, what do I want to see? And I said this before, is what kind of future do I want to live? Do I want for myself, for my trainees, for, people in the future, what do I want science to look like? And how can I play a role in getting us there? And so, even though that might take a lot of different forms, I know it's a very general answer, but I think that there are a lot of different ways in which, for me, it could be in publishing, or in just the practice in science, in mentoring, and all of these things. There are things that we would like to see improve, that we think can be better. And we could be the catalyst for that change. Each one of us can do it, right? So I think that is something that is a goal of mine. That's something that I think that I will never achieve, but I can try.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to a short-term goal that I have. So I think I was lucky to be raised by a father who led me to believe that I could do anything I wanted to. And I still have that firm belief. I'm a lifelong learner. I teach myself new things all the time. But I'm weird and I'm quirky and a little odd. And so for me, I've got a short-term goal of getting a little bit more self-improvement in the area of diplomacy, because it's not something that I have been historically very good at. And I think that as I look at what's happening socially around us, as I look at the power in being able to bring people together and understand conflict resolution and communication and negotiation. That's a short-term goal that I have, is to improve that specific element of my person.
I am last, and so everyone has such great goals. And I think my goal is I'm in a position in my career now, and my kids are old enough where I feel like I can start doing more to give back to the community. It's something that I get a lot from, and finding things that I'm passionate about and making a difference just really add as much value to me, I feel like, as the causes that I want to support. And so I feel like that's something that I've not done as much as I would like to have as I've been developing my career and had young children. But I feel like now is the time that I have an obligation. I've had so many benefits and have benefited from so much during my career path that I want to give back. And one of the areas that I have always been passionate about is STEAM education and early childhood education. And so one of my goals is to really get plugged into those areas and do some things that really make a difference to move the needle in those areas.
I think those are all really wonderful.
STEAM and not STEM, because the arts are also integrally important to advancing science.
Yes, that is so true. Well, I thank you all for sharing your goals with us. As I said, I firmly believe in taking a community-based approach to raise women up. So hopefully we can work to help you accomplish those goals together. So I'm going to pause here and look at some of the questions that have come in from the audience. We have a number of them, so I'd like to make sure that we have enough time to answer those. Let's see. So the first question is on negotiation. If there's no monetary opportunities, could you potentially request a title change? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. I think absolutely you can request a title change. And I think, I think that there are a lot of different dimensions and different axes on which you can negotiate. It's not always money, right? So, it's actually very clear in my field. It could be title, it could be space, it could be anything, it could be, it's not always money. So I think that it is good to sort of, it's a good question. It's a great question, because it's good to sort of think big picture, because there may be something else that's more valuable to you. And also there, I think some of the sort of shenanigans that go on when you even negotiate about money or anything like that is sometimes they will be willing to, give something, for example, they might be willing to give, this is just a monetary example, but there are a lot of others. Someone might give a one-time payment rather than an increase in salary. We all know that an increase in salary has much bigger long-term gains and much more long-term potential, right? Than that, even though the one-time payment can seem like a very good negotiation point. But I think that keeping in mind, all of the different types of things you can negotiate for, and sort of thinking outside the box, you may be able to get something that's very important to you, but that isn't so hard to give for them. It's not everything is of equal importance to both parties. And so that is one way to also maximize negotiation, is to maximize the value to you. And those are not always sort of, mutually exclusive. It can always be something that's, that's beneficial and also maybe achievable.
I would also encourage, think about when you think about what the reason for the title change is. And so in a lot of positions, a title change may be warranted for any number of specific reasons, but positional leadership isn't the only way to get what you want, and title change is one form of positional leadership. So you may be able to get the things that you want without a title change, and if you can I encourage you to do that, and also be sensitive to how your leadership or management views titles. If that's very important to them, then this may be something that they're very open to. If they feel that you should be able or can be able to lead without being given a specific title, then they may be sensitive to a request for just a title change as well.
Great. Another question that we have is, should you give out your expected salary range first, or let the other party put the number out first? What are the pros and cons of each approach? Oh, this one is such a struggle.
So I work in the academic sector, and there it's a little bit different than the private sector, where I think Amber and Andrea can help us a little bit more. But in the academic sector, these salaries are typically published. They're well known. There are salary surveys. So there's room for deviation within that, but it's generally understood where the starting salaries are, and there's less confusion about the challenge that you might face by presenting somebody with a potential salary.
And I think it is, so helpful to do your research to know what is market and what is reasonable. And, there's obviously pros and cons on either side. If you give out your salary, maybe you're proposing something that's lower than what you could have otherwise gotten. But I tend to favor that approach, because then, I don't know if that was, if I could have gotten something higher. But if I've done my research and I feel like this is a number that is right for my skills and my experience, and if I'm comfortable with that number, then, that's the number that I want to get, and I'm comfortable leading with that, even though it means that, maybe I left something on the table. Well, if that's the case, then hopefully I can work towards that in the future.
Yeah, I think Sue mentioned in the very beginning about understanding what the market value is for your skill set, and then how do you perform compared to average within the market. So that's a good metric to have. And I don't think it's necessarily not okay to give out your expected salary range, especially if you back it up by, and here's why I feel like I bring that kind of value. But if my advice would be, if you're going to give out an expected salary range, aim a little higher. You don't want to leave things on the table, and so do that. But then also be willing to back up why that's your expectation.
Great. Now we have a little bit of a shift in topic. This is a question, how can a woman showcase her potential without being judged as too strong, too confident, or having an attitude?
I'll go ahead and state the obvious, but you have no control over how somebody judges you. You do have control over your behavior and how you choose to operate in any situation. And I think you've got to identify a strategy that is true to who you are, understanding that it is not going to resonate with everybody.
Sue mentioned diplomacy as one of her goals. And I think it's important to understand that not everybody receives you in the same way. And so, some people call it reading a room, but understanding how the people around you are receiving you and being able to react to that. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're too strong or too confident, but you may want to tailor your approach differently based on who you're around. Men or women, everybody receives things differently.
And I think this is also one of those cultural issues, these implicit biases that are out there. And so, although this doesn't help with, how you're received right now, I think all of us can continue to work to address those implicit biases and make people realize that, these different communication styles coming from women are okay, and supporting, fostering those environments that support people to lead and advocate for themselves, in different ways, and not, again, in that mold that we're used to.
I think partially it's a calculation that we're making sort of in real time as to, what are our goals in speaking up and saying something, right? And so, sometimes if you are the only voice that's advocating for something, it's important that you're forceful in saying it. If there's not enough support, or everybody in the room doesn't look like you and you're the only one making the point, it's actually really important that you make a forceful point. And so, so in thinking about, okay, well, are there downsides to being forceful in that way? There could be. And so, but then, what are the pros and cons of doing that? Are you would you rather be less forceful and not have that point of view represented, and or maybe you will be seen as overbearing, but now people have a new perspective that they hadn't been thinking of. So I think weighing those pros and cons, sometimes it's okay to be received in that way, right? And so to sort of say, I'm going to take that sort of personal hit to advance this thing that I'm trying to get achieved. And so, and some people think that there are more or less effective ways of doing that, but I think keeping it in that frame of what is it that you're actually trying to achieve is always a good thing to keep in mind.
Great. And we have a question about teaching women in science. So this is within a high school setting. How can I prepare these young women in STEM to be successful going forward into college? And how can I best support them in making a path for themselves?
I love this question. I think that it's, one thing is, I don't know, my opinion has always been that it's okay to let people believe, and I think Sue mentioned this about having parents who sort of behave this way, is to let people think that they can achieve anything, and I think all of us, as we go further along, we will become further and further underrepresented as women, right? In as we get higher and higher in the career ladder. And so we will get those hits where we will find out the hard way that that there are obstacles in our way, and that's going to happen no matter what. So I don't know that sort of preparing people or sort of, shielding them in some way I think, we can just let them think that they can achieve anything, and having that attitude from the get-go will go further than I think anything else, So I've always felt that is sort of giving them that fuel, and on the front end is super important, whether it's parents or teachers at a young age or whatever it is. So, I thank all of all of those people in my life that were that way.
I'd add one more element of that, which is to proactively do your best to instill confidence because all of this is driven by confidence. And so if you have opportunities to instill confidence in a young woman, irrespective of whether it's in the sciences or not, but if you can see an opportunity to give them a mechanism by which they can grow, they can become more confident, that will translate over or bleed into their success academically.
And I would add to that, I think exposure is key. It's really hard for any young person to grow up to be something that they've never seen somebody close to them or somebody that looks like them do. And so expose young women to others that are in these types of fields, show them that this is a career path for them, and seek them out to show them these things. 20 years ago when I was graduating from high school, I didn't know about all of the science careers that were available to me. And most of that was because of exposure. Most of the women that I was around were teachers. And so that's kind of all my mind could process as far as what the available options were. And so expose them to women. There's plenty of mentorship opportunities too. Reach out to companies in the area and ask them if they have mentorship opportunities for young women so they can see themselves in those roles.
That's great. Yeah. So next question, this is a quick one. What social platforms do you feel give the best exposure?
Twitter.
I second that. Any other opinions?
Possibly LinkedIn, but I'm going to defer to my colleagues here on the panel who do this a lot better than I do.
Great. Let's see. Oh, go ahead, Amber.
I was going to say, I use LinkedIn a lot. I'm not great at Twitter, but I like to take a more passive approach to social media, and I think Twitter is a very active, but I do like to read the content and share content on LinkedIn, and it is very professional.
Great. And here's a question about I guess kind of related to resources. If you're working in a department that is challenged with, supporting individuals who have underrepresented backgrounds or women, do you find that training is helpful for them? For the departments, not the individuals, of course.
I think that training can be helpful, but it has to be the right training. The check the box diversity training, where people just go and sit and listen to what the rules are, is not very helpful. I have been through some trainings that are very much more experiential, a lot more in-depth discussion, and really digging deeper into some of those uncomfortable conversations. And I think that has helped open people's eyes to things, these especially implicit biases that that people weren't aware of. So I think done the right way, and I think that there's actually a lot of really good resources out there in implicit bias training right now. It can be helpful, but then it's also expensive. And so I guess I have no idea how expensive it is, but I'm assuming that the better the training, the more it costs. So how to get that meaningful training implemented, that's another one of these things of having to advocate for that probably within a department.
It seemed to me that culture is very important on whether or not training is effective. If people are willing to receive these new ideas and really consider them and implement them, then training can be very effective. If the culture is such that maybe they don't want to hear it or they're not open to it, then it's going to be a struggle.
I would say that, so I wish I could remember a study I saw recently that said that, that if the training actually doesn't necessarily cause changes in behavior. So even if they pass the test on the training, they don't necessarily change their behavior. And I would say, so in that vein, that accountability structure is really important, right? So more so than just getting the information to people is that there are some consequences for any poor outcomes, right? So, and I think that having something like that in place, and that could be, maybe that's tied into training such as, like bystander training, to have actually people intervene when they see things that are unacceptable, or, it's just part of having consequences for sort of bad behavior or bias and things like that. So I think those things, having structural change that accompanies the training, I think is really important.
I would add that you really have to critically assess the culture and the environment. I mean, there are some environments that are going to lag and they are not going to change. And if it's emotionally disruptive or damaging to you, you have to decide whether that's a culture in which you want to work.
Great. Thank you all for your comments. I appreciate that. Now, we do have several more questions that we're not going to be able to get to. We've reached our time today, but I encourage everyone who's in attendance today to continue the conversation and to broaden their network with the WISER Facebook group. And there's a link that Ellie has dropped into the chat box where you can link to that directly and kind of continue some of these discussions and find additional valuable resources. So thank you to all of our panelists. I appreciate the honest discussions and the helpful advice that you've provided. And I appreciate all of you being a part of my network and for sharing these experiences with the rest of our community as well. Next, I'd like to just take a quick moment to introduce Dennis Ridenauer. He is the President and CEO at our last partner organization, BioNexus KC. He's going to close out the event for us. Dennis?
Thanks, Sonia. Thanks to everyone for taking the time to join us this morning. I think we heard from some amazing women about really important topics, things like mentorship, personal branding, networking, negotiation, and even using your voice and having your voice be heard. And I think whether you're a man or a woman, I think there's just some really incredibly useful guidance that was shared today. So I was blown away by the conversations. I was blown away by the panelists. I hope it's left you as inspired and educated and ready to take on the world as I am. So thanks to the panelists for their time and insight. I know many of them, and they've had significant contributions to the region. So thank you for taking the time today. I also want to make sure I thank Missouri Cures and Biokansas for their partnership. You know, our region is really unique in a number of ways, but I think our willingness to work collaboratively on cool projects and events, it's one of my favorite things about our region, and this morning's event was a really great example of that. I think I'd also be remiss if I didn't recognize and acknowledge the talented women that are leading Missouri Cures and Biokansas. Dena and Sonia are just incredibly brilliant and innovative, and I feel very privileged to get to work with them on a number of different initiatives. I also want to give an extra shout out to Missouri Cures. You know, Dena and Ellie have really done an amazing job with the WISER series. It's become, I think, just a fantastic vehicle for highlighting and connecting with amazing women working across the region. I think that she mentioned at the beginning, but I thought it would be good to just mention the next WISER events are coming up September 22nd, focused on Columbia, and November 6th, focused on St. Louis. And as she mentioned, they're going to be virtual, so I think just a great opportunity for all of us to hear from women leaders across the region. And they also, Missouri Cures also just launched the WISER Conversations podcast. I think that's going to be really great. They've got at least one episode up, I know. So you don't need to wait for these events really to hear from, you know, our region's all-stars. So check it out if you're able. Again, I hope you're able to take away some great insight from today's event. It's now time for all of us to go out and do the work to integrate what we heard and be the change that we hope to see in our industries and in our region. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.